Welcome to the What Happens Next YouTube channel. What we're aiming to do with this channel is share content designed to make sure that you're supported through whatever's next in your life. And we'd love to continue to do that. I've got a favour to ask today, and what I'd ask you to do is just subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it really helps us deliver really good quality content on a consistent basis. Thank you, and let's go on to the interview. Good morning and welcome to, Golf. Welcome to What Happens Next, the show where we explore aspects of being at a crossroads in our life and thinking about some of the things we might want to consider when thinking about that crossroads and the decisions we need to make. Now, if you've been following what we're doing on What Happens Next, and in particular what we're doing at www.whathappensnext.life or on the YouTube channel, thanks to you if you're subscribing already, you'll know that What Happens Next isn't just about the financial decisions we need to make. It's about a holistic way of looking at that crossroads. But often, in my experience as a chartered financial planner, some of the conversations that stop us moving on to what happens next are about money. And often they're about that conversation about how much is enough. And I'm really pleased today to be joined by Cliff because we're going to look at some of the aspects that our business owner clients suffer when they're thinking about sort of how much is enough. In particular, preparing for a sale or the next step in their business, and what people should think about with plenty of time to spare to make sure that if somebody's business is part of their number, then their number to achieve financial independence, what steps they need to be taking to make sure that they're ready. Cliff, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's brilliant. But before we do that, I want to talk about sort of well-being practices, because what happens next isn't only about the money, it's also about living a life. And I know you're a fan. I mean, I'm a fan of Tips from the Tub, which is your brilliant video episodes where you do it from what would you describe it as? Is it a cold water immersion bath? How would you describe it?
To be quite honest and quite simple, it's a wheelie bin full of water. To be honest,
look, you don't need the latest technology to do cold water immersion, right? It's just
it's in the summer it doesn't quite work that well, but in the winter it works lovely. But yeah, it's nothing fancy. It's a wheelie bin filled with water.
It works. And help me understand, like, sort of like, because one of the aspects that we talk a lot on What Happens Next about is physical well-being and making sure that not only are we looking after the money side, but we're thinking about living longer, healthier, happier lives. Tell me a little bit about what you get from that therapy and what you include as part of that mix to make sure that you're feeling good when you start the day.
That's a great question, and I think most of us have cars or houses or whatever, and we never think not to service them or look after them or to maintain them. And so the same thing with our bodies. We need to do some sort of physical exercise and also help us just to calm the noise level down, because this world's busy and it's frantic and it's noisy. So we need to find a way of doing that. And so I do some HIIT training in the mornings, and then I jump into the tub. Sometimes, even if it's just for 30 seconds, just to quickly get in there, get out. But I try to go for as long as possible. And it was during one of my sessions in there, I was a bit bored, sitting there freezing, thinking, what can I do? And I thought, well, why not just have some tips from the tub and give from that, at least use that time productively. So that's how the idea kind of stemmed from.
I love it. Absolutely love it. So we've talked about your cold water immersion, and I mentioned that I'm not there yet. I'm doing some breathing exercises and meditation in the morning, but my shower turns hot, so it's too comfortable. I need to turn it to the cold part. But we're not here to talk about cold water immersion. We're here to talk about business. So tell us a little bit about you.
Well, my background's ex-military. But I've been in business now for over 24, coming up 25 years. I franchised a business. I've licensed another one in 5 countries, and I've bought and sold 4 of my own companies, plus set up a few others. So I've got a kind of broad range of sectors and experience. So what I did find very interesting is when I sold my demolition business back in 2019, I quite enjoyed the buying and selling aspect of a business. And so I went on a bit more of a focused spree to look to buy companies. And it was during this time that I was having the same conversations with owners about valuation, about deal structure, about the company, the finances. And I was finding that things were in a mess. People weren't prepared. People weren't thinking about it. There's all pretty much on a ad hoc basis, or just fly by the seat of your pants kind of scenario. And I was finding that the companies I was looking at, they weren't companies, they weren't businesses, they were jobs and with problems. And I don't want to buy that.
Yeah.
And so during the COVID period, I kind of sat down and looked at what I did in my companies to be able to buy and sell them when I wanted to.
Yeah.
And so it was during the COVID period that I kind of collated a framework and wrote my book, The Smarter Exit, to help business owners better understand the process that you need to go through in order to exit successfully, whatever that exit may look like for that person, so that at least they're on the front foot, they know what to expect. Because I think there's a lot of help out there for new companies, for startups, but there's very little proper, real help that allows the owner to say, okay, where am I now? Where do I actually want to be? And what I need to do to get there? And so hopefully my book kind of instills that practice, again, very much like your physical and mental well-being, just taking a stop, taking a breather, assessing where you are, looking at where you need to be, and finding a way to get there. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, love that. Love that. And it's interesting how you talk about people with a job. I last week, I was doing a bit of traveling last week, but in the middle, I went to a conference and they were talking about financial planning businesses and the options they've got to sell. And one interesting point was often with a lot of financial advisor businesses, and I don't think this is unique in our space, I think it's probably in every space, is they leave it too late to get those structures in place. So actually the choice in terms of acquirer is really limited, right? How's your experience with that in terms of people planning and preparing potentially with not enough time to spare?
Oh, that's very common. And sadly, I see the effects of it all too often. People leave it far too late and they give themselves very little options. And so my kind of definition of exit planning is simply allowing you to have options and choices at the time you need them, rather than being forced down a particular road. And so by leaving it too late, it puts you in a hole, because you don't really know how much money you're going to need to be financially secure. You're relying on a business that you think is worth potentially millions, but actually sometimes it's unsellable. And so by leaving it late, you've got no option. You either have to stay in a company until such time as you are able to get financial independence or
Freedom.
security, or if you leave, or you're forced to leave, then you have to alter your standard of living, and that could be quite a big ask. So I don't want owners to be forced down a particular route. I want them to have options. And so that's really the main message is to help owners get the point where they have options they can choose, rather than something being told or someone telling them what to do.
And I'm with you with that, because it's really interesting. I mean, I think in our world, options is about diversification. Maybe don't rely on your entire financial independence as your business, but it's also about taking the action now to make your business, so your business is in a super robust state, so that it's ready if you need the money to sell. It's an interesting one, but choice is the key factor there, isn't it? I've got clients who are financially independent who want to carry on. Great. If it's fitting, and it's interesting when we think about what happens next, because often that cliff of stopping work and stopping and selling your business might work for your financial well-being because it gives you security, might not work so well for your intellectual well-being because you're like, well, what do I do? What do I do now? So I think like sort of when you zoom out, there's other factors to consider, but choice is the key factor. And I think what you do is providing people, ensuring that people take the right actions now so that they've got the choice to do that. It's really interesting. I think we've had this conversation before a few times now. They've sort of clients come in and say to me, you know what, Chris, I think my financial plan's okay because my business is worth 2 million quid, 3 million quid, 5 million quid, whatever it may be. Great. Help me understand where that valuation's come from. And they go, well, that's how much I want to sell it for. And frankly, it doesn't matter, does it? Because actually the market decides what you need to pay, but you've got to design your business to make sure that the market wants it. And I know that what you do is doing that. So talk me through the component parts of that business by design and how that works as part of making sure that you're building an asset that's worth something in your business.
Yes, perfect. I think it's what I call holistic advising. So we don't just look at the business because the business is only a part of the overall picture. We've got the person and we've got their financial plan. So we need to look at all three things in the round and to make sure that the business is working for their personal plan, that's providing for their personal goals and dreams and visions, but also that the business is providing for their financial security. So when owners are relying on their company as a pension pot, they have to be very sure that if the company is worth £1 million, it is actually worth £1 million, not just in their head. And so understanding valuation is critical. And I know there are a lot of people out there you kind of really use one method of valuing a company, and that's typically say 2 to 5 times EBITDA. Suck your thumb and work something out. But valuation goes far more than that. You get financial value, which is essentially looking at your accounts. We use at least 7 or around 7 methods to value the business. So we have a valuation weighting and range, and that dictates what the EBITDA multiple is, also dictates what the true value is using mathematical calculations. But then a more important aspect of valuation is transferable value. And that is essentially the value that's being transferred from the seller to the buyer. And very often I see companies from a financial point of view worth £1, £2, £3 million, but because there are certain risks within the business, key risks, typically owner reliance or employee reliance, customer, whatever, client reliance, supplier reliance, that then erodes the financial value. So financial value is always dictated to by transferable value. And at times, I've seen a company worth 1.2 million financially, but is ultimately unsellable because it's the owner. The owner was responsible for most of the knowledge that goes into the business, client relationships. There were no systems and processes. So if the owner were to leave and you and I were to take over the business, we would fail because we don't have that experience. So you have a company worth $1 million, but actually it's unsellable. So understanding where what the value of the company is, B, what the risk profile of the business is, and what the transferable value of the business is critical to understanding, right, this is where I am now. And really the company's not worth $1 million, it's worth 100,000. So what do I need to do in the next 5 to 10 years to get it to the £1 million valuation? And so this is where you come in and you can help the client work on a financial plan, but we use the business to fund that financial plan. And in a perfect world, and this is what I call like the gold standard, is we don't rely on the business to fund your financial plan. The money you get from the business should be like the cherry on the cake. It should be the icing on the top. But that's the gold standard. So if we can rely less and less on the business to fund the retirement plans, the more safe and secure you will be. But if there is an element of that, we need to make sure that the business does stack up. the
Yeah,
valuation.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you talk about that owner independence. In my head, part of that is, well, how do you step away on a gradual basis to make sure the business isn't relying on you? And that means recruitment often. That means building teams. That means training and development. That means all of the elements that take quite a lot of time. So what would be the, when you're thinking about adding value to a business and thinking about what they need to do, what's the track they need from a time perspective, and what does it range from and to, and what defines that track?
It's down to the size of the company, the time the owners have, and the financial resources they have available.
Yeah,
Because, like you say, to build a team around you is difficult. And I've worked with companies from 6 figures right through to the mid 8 figures.
yeah,
And the funny thing is, they all have very similar problems, and that is people problem. And if you start to dig below the surface, like I have, you find that sometimes the owners they're really good managers, but aren't good leaders, or they are good leaders, but aren't good managers, or they're neither. They just had a great idea, happen to be successful, and they haven't got the right people around them. And so, what the first thing I see fall off the wagon is communication.
yeah,
And speaking to staff, speaking to owners, and a management team, you unpick very quickly people's communication styles, the lack of communication, lack of pure clear direction as to where the company is going, what is ultimately there to do. And so people are pulling in all sorts of directions. And so it
yeah,
does take time and deliberate intention from the owners, from the management team, to get that communication going, to get the right people on the right seats in the right bus.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that is really dependent upon, I say, the owner's time and the financial resources. So it's probably 3 to 5 years, I would say, to get that in shape, because what a buyer wants to see is a track history and a track record of it. So it gives you
yeah.
essentially 1 to 2, maybe 3 years to get the company on the right track, and
Get all the bits in place. Yeah, yeah,
then prove concept to the buyer. So yeah, I would say the earlier you can start, the better. Obviously, that's the ultimate. But if you want to leave it
yeah.
for as late as possible, I would say 3 to 5 years, absolute max.
And I know there's an amazing PDF link on your LinkedIn, by the way, that I'd recommend that everybody download. So please check that out once we're done for Cliff, and we'll make sure that when we post this on YouTube and on the What Happens Next website, it goes on the show notes. I'm pretending I know how to do that, Cliff. I don't. Somebody in my team's really good at doing. Somebody apparently can do that. I'm hoping. But I love that PDF because it talks about the 12 things that you might want to consider when thinking about getting a sensible valuation. Just unpack for me some of those aspects that we might not think about as business owners, because as you say, life is busy and we've got a lot on our plate, that we should be thinking about now to make sure that in that 3 to 5 years, 10 years, whatever it may be, our business is ready.
Well, if you're looking to sell, so I think just kind of taking a step back, there are essentially 3 ways an owner can exit a company. The first one is they simply go close the company down
Yeah,
because they can't sell it. That applies to a lot of SMEs where the owner is the business and they're just too small to sell. The risks are just too high. That's absolutely fine. My wife's company's like that. She is the business, but we got to use the business to fund her personal and her financial plan. So that's fine. So understanding what that looks like for you is important. You could go through planned liquidation, and which is also a perfectly good way of exiting company, provided it's done properly and
yeah,
creditors
yeah,
paid and employees are sorted out. That's absolutely fine. But then if you're looking to sell, it's a slightly more complex thing, because who's your buyer? Are you selling to a family member? Because that will look very different. Are you looking to sell internally? And the internal buyout options, there are so many flavors depending on your tax position, how much control you want, do you have a team, all that kind of stuff. So there are various flavors within the internal buyout. And then you've got the external, Who's the potential person externally that you're trying to attract? Are you looking to take your company to the stock market? Are you trying to attract private equity? If you don't get to those heights, potentially looking to get a competitor or a strategic buyer to buy you out. People like me, who's a private investor, may not know very much about the sector, but can come in on a managerial level, lead the company, but have a team below them to take care of the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
Or you can have an owner manager. So depending on, I think the key thing is knowing how you're going to exit. Then once you know that, so if you go to sell, you then how do you build the business and grow the business such that it's attractive to your target buyer? Because each buyer will have pros and cons. And so you need to be happy with what those pros and cons are. The next thing I think would be to understand the valuation, to really get a handle on what your company's worth. Another big thing I come across is owners don't really have an understanding of deal structure. They think someone will just rock up to their door and give them a check for the full amount on completion. Now, that may happen. I've got a client in London at the moment looking to exit with another larger company. But that larger company has valued their company at 4.6, I believe, with a 70% on completion and 30% earnout.
Yeah.
So even on that scale, there's an earnout or a deferred period. So to get this idea out of your head of saying, right, I'm going to sell my company, someone's going to come with a big checkbook, give me a big check on completion, isn't going to happen. It may do, but chances are it probably won't. So
this is one interesting factor as well. It's like that element of factoring that time frame into what you're thinking your next step is. And we've got a client who, it's an interesting one, had a sale date in mind with the assumption that that's the period of time he was going to stop. And the buyout was actually 3 years after. Now he's sold to a larger competitor, and the deal financially was a good one. Interestingly, he didn't enjoy the buyout period because he was just so used to that autonomy of running his own thing, which is an interesting one. But also he didn't factor in the time that buyout might take as part of his plan. And that yeah, as you say, thinking about that early is probably worthwhile, right?
It's key, I think. So
Yeah.
if you got in your head that you go to exit in 2 years' time, but actually the buyout is a 3-year buyout or earnout, that's what buyers do to offset risk. If they're going to be paying you chunky money, they're going to need to make sure that the investment is secure. So the way they do that is by keeping you in there. But then, like you say, you lose autonomy. This company that I'm working with, they will be there for 2 years, but they will not be running the company. They'll be employees of the company. And have you mentally prepared for that? And have you got the time for it? And also the financial part of it, can you afford the 30% delay potentially of the earnout? And what if the earnout doesn't happen? Now, have you prepared for that? So all these kind of questions need to come into play. And then I think the other key part is, what are your plans, personal plans, be it family, personal, whatever, pre-exit? What do you want to achieve before a particular date? And then after that, when you do exit, what are you going to do after that? Because let's assume you exit at 65 and assume you live to 85. That's 20 years. That's a long time. You can play only so much golf and go on so many holidays. So what else are you going to do with your time, with your life? Where are you going to add value? And I think having a very clear plan of what you're going to do pre and post exit is imperative to having a very smooth transition period.
100%.
So I think that really needs to be at the forefront. But at the same time, when you're looking to sell, as kind of immediate quick wins, is let's look at the risk profile of the company. Where are the risks within the business? Now, step back for a second, look at the business through the eyes of the buyer. Would you buy your business? Yes or no? And if you were, what would be your concerns? And so I always help my clients to kind of view the company through the lens of someone who's looking to buy. And then you start to see all the potential risks and pitfalls within the company. So that can be, it could be a 12-month process of addressing some of those risks. But it's good to kind of take a step back, because not only do you address those risks, you also then start to have a better company. And you may be on the fringe of not liking your company very much because it's causing you a lot of stress, because there aren't systems and processes and people in place. But once you start to de-risk the business, start to have the right people doing the right things, actually you start to enjoy the business a bit more.
Might be more enjoyable. Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
good.
yeah.
So you actually, by very nature, you create a better business that you can then sell on. So it's a win-win. I don't think it's, to get your company ready is a job. I think it's to simply create a better business, and you just use exit planning as a tool or as a method to do that. So it's a win-win for you,
Well, I
for
mean,
your now and later.
it's really interesting, isn't it? And there's a couple of things that I just want to touch on. I am completely with you with thinking about a bit of a life plan post exit. The reason that what happens next as a project exists is because we think the money conversation is the only one we need to have, and it's not. It's about that, and it's really interesting. You talk about that golf thing. I had a client of mine who stopped work, and his plan was, look, I love golf. I'm gonna play more golf. I was like, okay, great. 6 months later, he comes back to me and says, golf is good as a hobby, as a job, as something I do every day. It's not something I want to do. Now, interestingly, he's now got a lifestyle business that he loves, keeps him engaged intellectually and socially, and he does 3 days a week playing golf, which is fine. But yeah, that balance, that assumption that I'm gonna just add more leisure activities, actually the evidence says doesn't make us particularly happy. And it's interesting, isn't it? Like, if you improve your business and it becomes less of a chain, and it gives you more autonomy of time, which is ultimately the finite resource we're all after, you might choose to carry on for longer because it's less of an issue. What I'm curious about, though, is, as somebody who's bought and sold businesses and advises people to get their businesses ready, what are the red flags? What are the things that you look at in a business and go, actually not for me?
There are loads, actually. The first kind of red flag that I tend to pick on quite quickly is the finances.
Yeah,
Are they using, or are their finances neat and tidy? Are they up to date?
yeah,
How accurate are they? Have they been using the company as a personal piggy bank? So I've seen horrendous accounts where the owners have put the house improvements and renovations to the company. They buy toilet paper through the company. They buy personal cars to the company. So to decipher what is personal, what is business, is very tricky. So
messy. Yeah, yeah,
that's messy. So that's a first little red flag. Then the next kind of red flag for me would be to see how involved the owner is in the company. What are their day-to-day activities? And if those activities are fairly key, like getting sales in, dealing with key customers or clients, again, red flag, owner dependence. As we go a bit deep into the company, we look at the employees and see if there's any risk within the employees. Are they the right people in there? Are there any employees where they are shouldering too much of the workload? Are there any employees who know too much about a particular process and that process hasn't been documented? So again, documentation, IT, HR, health and safety, all these things come into the fore. So it's just really about having that conversation. And then the biggest factor is the owner's expectation, again, on valuation. And they have these massively overly inflated prices on their companies. And when you share with them the mathematical calculations of the
yeah.
valuation, they are horrified. And then they kind of either sometimes don't talk to me anymore, or they engage to improve. So it's a tricky one, but it's what's going on behind the scenes that interests me. Looking at your sales channels. How many sales channels do you have, and are you reliant upon those on particular product or services? What are they contributing to the turnover? What are they contributing to the gross margin? And most owners don't really have that data to hand. They just say, well, I do plumbing. So, well, what part of the plumbing part do you do? Do you do new install, refurbs, or kind of, and just break it down slightly so I can see, where does your revenue stem from, and what do they impact on your gross margin? So, understanding the business, understanding your customer profile, your sales profile, your product and service profile is vital.
Yeah, I love that. And what happens when you're like, because it's interesting, isn't it? Because you do, like, as a small business owner, SME business owner, put love, sweat, tears, effort into building your business. I think the interesting thing that's going through my head at the minute, I'm asking for a friend, I'm not, I'm asking for me, but is getting out of your own way and actually realizing you're not the best person for the job. But how long does that transition take to, like, so is it an ego thing? Is it how do you make sure that you're having that open and honest conversation with the business owner to say, look, if you want this business to have value, you've actually got to be less important because there's an identity there as well, isn't there?
There is, and I've had various types of conversations along those lines and various outcomes. Some people
Tell
are
me.
very open and they say, look, if I'm not the right person, if I'm not the right CEO, if I'm more of the creative type, tell me, and then we'll get the CEO in. I'll stay creative. And that's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah,
And those people are very easy to deal with because they understand that actually I may not be the best person for this particular role. But people who have the identity stuck in the business, people who are control freaks, they are the ones that take the most time because they have to, if the identity is in the business, then that's an emotional release that we have to try and break. If they are control freaks, then they have to decide, do they want to still be the most clever person in the company, the
yeah,
person with all the knowledge, or they're happy to get that knowledge out into the workplace. And again, it's a slow release of allowing people the responsibility, the opportunity to fail, because I think because the control thing comes in whereby they're scared of people making mistakes.
yeah,
So, well, you can't be afraid of that. They will make mistakes, just as you did probably in the early days. So let them make
100%.
mistakes
Yeah,
under control, under supervision, and then you slowly release them into more and more responsibility. So it's a mindset thing. And depending on how open you are to getting out of your own way, the quicker the process will be. And then finding the right people that you gel with. And when I say gel, sometimes I mean conflict. Don't surround yourself with people who will just agree with you. You need a team who
yeah,
will call you out and go, Chris, why are you doing that way? Chris, how about
yeah,
this? How
yeah,
about that?
yeah,
Have a
yeah,
very open, frank, and positive, constructive conversation around a particular
yeah.
subject, because then you get the most benefit of the right decision. Whereas
Yeah,
if you have
and you
people
need
all
that
agree,
diversity of thought, right? You know,
you
you
do,
need
you
that
do.
element of people saying, "Well, look, you know, why are we doing this? Or is there a better way?" And yeah, that element is important.
It's really
Yeah,
important. Otherwise, you end up saying everyone agrees with you, and you end up going down the wrong hole. So, have that positive, constructive conflict within the company. Encourage it actually, and I think you'll get a better result from it. But it's again,
I
it's
I
about
I
leadership
love.
and
I mean,
communication.
it's interesting. One of the best tips that I was ever given, and funny enough, this gentleman that sort of I was sharing ideas, and this was a couple of years ago, probably actually 4 or 5 years ago. I said, look, I'm the team keep on coming to me and wanting me, and he said, well, I had that a couple of years ago, funny enough, and I did this thing where one of my team came to me and said, Chris, this guy's name is Chris as well. I've got this challenge, and he just said, "What would you do if I wasn't here and you can get in touch with me for a week?" And they went, "Well, actually, I do this, and this," and he just went, "Do that then." And actually, it was a really interesting way to empower other people to make those independent decisions and like empower you to not always have the answer, right? Which is the element that you need to get to. Talk to me a little bit about there's some elements of the PDF that I read that I really felt were sort of learned for me. And even though I'm a financial planner, I'm not I haven't got an accountancy background. We've got management accounts at Cervelo, and they give us real insight into the direction of travel and where we're going. Well, from a valuation perspective, you talked about add backs as part of that calculation. Tell me a little bit about how they're factored in and what they are and what business owners should think about when they're thinking about add backs.
Well, I think that there are two types of add backs. You have business add backs and personal add backs. Business add backs are fairly straightforward. It's one-off free costs that you may incur. So, for instance, I don't know. So now you had an HR problem, you had to get rid of an employee, and it cost you 20 grand, say.
Yeah.
That's a one-off free cost that probably, hopefully, won't happen again. So we can add that back into the business because it's a one-off freak of nature.
But if you were looking at the profits for a particular year, you know that particular expense wouldn't be repeatable, right?
Exactly. So
Right.
we look for things like that, and if there's justification, we'll add them back quite happily, no problem at all. When it gets a bit tricky is on the personal add backs, because then we go, well, okay, you got to leave the company. You say 20 grand or 50 grand won't be there anymore. Prove it. And very often they don't have invoices or receipts that go with it. So easy things like mobile phones, we can easily look at and add those back because you'll take the phone with you. That's fine. Cars potentially as well. If car leaves the company, we just readjust the valuation, and we know that that payment won't go out if we don't replace the vehicle. But when you start to use things like doing your bathroom up or doing your kitchen or paying for holidays, that starts to get very, very blurry. And there's only so much that a buyer will be willing to essentially add back without saying, okay, you're taking the mick now. So and that's why I say if owners can stop using their business as a personal piggy bank.
It just gets really messy, right?
It gets messy and it messes up the data. And if you want a particular valuation, then you need to have some discipline. Also, again, there's a tax element as well, because if you're buying the company on a share purchase and the owner has been using the company incorrectly, there could be a tax liability should you be inspected by HMRC. So even though there will be a warranty in the SPA, it's still relying on you because you're now the owner. So again, it just clouds things too much. So business add backs are fine. I would try and leave the personal stuff out the business just to keep things clean.
I mean, effectively, what you could do is, as a business owner, is treat yourself as an employee and pay yourself a wage, right? Now, that wage could be salary, dividends, whatever it may be, but a consistent wage so you can clearly evidence what your value is to the business is probably smoother than just as and when and ad hoc, and as you say, treat it like a personal bank account. One question though, in terms of extraction of value. So let's say, for example, business has done really well. I'm paying myself a salary that I can afford to live on. The profits, my bank balance is accumulating, and I want to extract some of that value as a dividend. Does that muddy the waters as much as
no? I think
show, right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fine, as long as it's documented. But then again, I would probably come to someone like you and say, look, I've got 100 grand in the bank. What do I do with it? And take it out of the business a bit more tax efficiently rather than dividend. So I would do that instead rather than take it out personally. But yeah, there are ways of doing it. And again, putting into pensions or whatever into investment funds, I think that is probably the most tax efficient way of doing it. But yeah, if you want to take it out personally as a dividend, that's fine. That will just be a record saying dividend, and that we know that once you go as the seller, I as a buyer either could leave that money in there or take it out myself, but that can be added back into the business, no problem.
And thank you for making that point, Cliff, because particularly in the UK, paying 60% plus to extract it from your business, depending on what your tax rate is probably not the smartest move in the world. I should have been making that tip, but I'm glad you did it for me. So add backs, that's really useful. How about replacement costs, though? So you've got a business owner, they've got a team, they're in a position where they're thinking about sort of selling their business, but they're conscious that they probably need to employ somebody to replace what they're doing. How's that factored in when it comes to business valuation?
that's one of the key things, how buyers will absolutely decimate someone's valuation. So they say, just for argument's sake, let's say a company's worth, I don't know, £300,000.
Mm.
My question to you then, Chris, is what's your day-to-day operation in the company? What are you responsible on a day-to-day
Yeah,
basis? And you go,
yeah,
I do this. I say, great, okay. If I were to replace you in the business today, how many people would I need to employ, and what would be a fair wage for that? And so, essentially, looking at your business and what you do, you say, oh, we need to spend around 50K to replace me. Brilliant. So coming back to the valuation of £300,000, let's just say the company's netting 100,000. So we use 3 times EBITDA, round figures, £300,000. I've just halved your valuation because I
yeah.
now need to
Because I've
pay.
got to get somebody to do your job. Yeah,
Exactly. So I've lost 50K in profit. So your company's not worth 300, it's now worth 150. So that's how buyers use that way to reduce the value of the company. But again, this is where planning comes in. If you know that you need to spend 50K to replace you, you can do it slowly. And yes, your profit will drop. And yes, essentially your valuation, financial valuation will drop. But if you give yourself enough time, you can claw that money back. So essentially, you can get back up to £100,000 net profit and have people in there replacing you on a day-to-day level, which brings your company back up to a £300,000 valuation.
yeah,
But you
yeah,
also have your time.
yeah,
So again, time is your key. Is to leave yourself enough of that to enable you to replace those people with whatever you're doing, and then have the time to rebuild that profit back up to what it was before you handed everything over to various people in your company. So again, time's a key factor on that one.
yeah. Love that, love that. And that's why, thinking about what happens next, I'd suggest you need to be doing 3 to 5 years, if not more, in advance, so that you can get all these component parts in place and think about some of these elements. Big challenges. So we've talked about some of the big challenges: being over reliant on the business for the particular individual. As you say, using your business account as a personal bank account and muddying the waters. What's the one challenge business owners face that we haven't spoken about so far?
I think it's lack of preparation around the unexpected. So the stats at the moment are around, they say around 50% of owners will be forced to exit. So half of owners will have no option but to exit, be it close a company down or sell it at a reduced rate or whatever the case is, due to unexpected personal life events. So that could be divorce, it could be death, it could be disability or illness. It could be disagreement between shareholders or directors, or it could be the fact that the owner is just absolutely burnt out. They're stressed out. They had enough, and so they'll take a pound to get out the burning ship, essentially. So, being aware of unexpected things, and especially I've seen this very often, divorce cases, and I've seen it in death, and I've seen it in disease and disability and sickness, where people think they're absolutely fine, and then they go to the doctor, get a diagnosis, and they've got 12 months to sort their life out.
Yeah.
And so the company isn't prepared for those kind of things, and then they leave the family with the burden of dealing with the business if this whole thing happens very quickly. So it's about planning the unexpected. The amount of people that I see who don't have wills, don't have power of attorneys, don't have proper insurances scare me,
Yeah,
because those things almost de-risk a lot of the unexpected things.
yeah, yeah.
So I would say to the owners, one of the biggest things I'm seeing is the unexpected. And I've got, a friend of mine died 2 months ago, and he was 38. Another friend died at 43 or had a heart attack. That was 4 years ago. So these things happen very, very quickly. Another friend has got early onset dementia. Again, very early on. And things you can't plan, or nor do you want to plan for, essentially. But
It's very interesting, isn't it? And I talk to all of my clients about this quite a lot. I think the job of a really good professional advisor is to act as that aspirational optimist, that build plans that look like this is the potential and the possibility, but also a real pragmatic pessimist where you're saying if the worst that could happen, this is how the plan looks. But the good news is we can take action and do something about it. Now, some of that action is super simple, like writing a will. I think when we did ours years ago, I think it cost a few £100s, and I don't think it's any like fundamentally any more expensive than that now. And getting the foundations in place. What we find is, and we're doing work with a few businesses now in this, the two factors that they need to factor, what happens to the shares if something happens to you is number one. Where do you want that money to go, and who do you want to have control of the business? Because that's normally two separate people. And then part two, and this is the big one, what key individuals, like you've built a team, you've got this amazing bunch of people, what key individuals would you need to replace if something happened to them? And certainly asking having an aspirational financial plan and putting the actions in place to build that is great. As you say, things do and can go wrong, and it's important to make sure we plan for that as well. One really interesting thing you talk about is the business shop front. So like how the business is shown to the outside world. Why is that important, and what should businesses consider when thinking about their shop front?
Well, it's a bit of a balance as well. Yes, you have to put your best foot forward. That's like going on a date. You always try and dress the best, and you behave as well as you as well as you can. And same thing goes for businesses. And so when we look at essentially the shop front is what I call business attractiveness.
Yeah.
How attractive is the business? And this goes for clients, this goes for buyers. And so we look at Companies House, we look at social media, we look at testimonials, feedback. We go into the office or the shop, whatever the business may be, and we'll see what the atmosphere. We'll see how we are greeted. We'll phone the office. How do they answer the phone? All these things will give someone a picture of how a business operates, which is fine. However, very often, if you go behind the scenes, do some digging, you see it's just a complete mess.
Yeah.
So sometimes as a client, you may be sweet talked into saying this is the best company to work with, and so you buy into it, and you find the service isn't what you expected, or there are problems with the product, or whatever the case is. From a buyer's perspective, you see this wonderful business, wonderful accounts, but you do some digging and you find that the finances are a mess.
They need to match, don't they?
They have
need
to match.
align. Yeah,
exactly. So business attractiveness and business salability, which is the back end, they have to say the same thing. And unfortunately, all too often, I see some really attractive companies. Then I do some digging and I see, man, that's really unattractive. So the salability, the back end has to match the front end. And so that is the key part, is the shop front has to match, but it has to be good as well. Otherwise, you won't attract the right people. So you have to have that there, but it must be matched equally by the back end. Otherwise, it's no point.
Yeah, no, completely get that. I mean, that element of shop front is important, but superficial, isn't it? And you're talking about digging deeper to make sure that you do that. One conversation, funny enough, that we were having at a conference I attended last week was the options you've got in terms of succession of your business, and we've sort of touched on it. Do the principles that you teach equally apply to potential MBOs, management buyouts, potentially if a client wants to sell to an employee ownership trust? What additional factors should people consider when thinking about what their options are and thinking about what happens next for them in terms of preparing their teams to buy out, for example?
This is where it becomes very important to understand how you want to exit. And if you're going to sell, how you're going to sell, who you're going to sell to. So if your intention is to do an MBO, then for the next at least 5 years, you're going to need to create a team around you who can run the company and afford to buy you
Yeah.
out. But that will also then very much depend on deal structure, because most of the managers probably won't have a big fat cash sitting around somewhere who can pay you out. So deal structure, deferred consideration will come into that kind of thought process. On, say, an EOT, again, you need to have a management team in place. But also the flip side is that you're going to be in the business for 2 to maybe 5 years after you've exited the ETO, to make sure that the ETO has been paid back and the commercial lender's been sorted out. So it's about understanding really about the mechanics of that, the amount of control you want over the process, your tax position, the time you have, the people around you. Can you build up a team within 2-3 years? Yes or no? And all these factors need to come into play to work out exactly what it is that you're going to need to do. And do you have the resources to do it?
Well, I suppose the other thing about employee ownership trusts, and I've known people who've done it really successfully, but I've also known of employers that have done that, assuming that there's continued success of the business, meant that they'd get paid back the deferred consideration. And unfortunately, on one of the cases that I'm thinking about, the business failed after 6 or 7 years, and it was actually a significantly sort of sized business in terms of turnover. And there's the additional risk of that route that often people don't talk about. But yeah, it was an interesting conversation, because it was a conversation about building your business and aligning it with your continued values. And often, if it's a consolidator, that might not always align. I'm going to give you a magic wand, Cliff, for this question. This magic wand allows you to give 3 pieces of knowledge to every business in the country about making sure that they're ready. So what 3 bits of knowledge would you love to impart on every business owner today?
Preparation's key. Start today. Because you're starting the exit planning doesn't mean you're going to exit. It just means that you are preparing for it, and you probably will have a better business at the end of it. So prepare as soon as you possibly can, and that also includes preparing for the unexpected as well. Understand how you're going to exit. Now, are you going to close the company down? Are you going to liquidate? And are you going to sell? And what are the preferred options for you? And how does it work out for you financially? And the third one is probably a combination. If you're looking to sell, understand deal structure. Also understand what is required or what will be required from you in the due diligence phase, because that's quite an intense, stressful phase. So make sure that you start to build up a bank of documents, like a knowledge vault, information vault, to deal with the due diligence process.
Let's dig into that. Let's dig into that a tiny bit more. The due diligence, if somebody's preparing their business for sale, what do they need to make sure they've got to confirm, to make that process a little bit of a smooth one?
All contracts, documents, systems, procedures, IP, trademarks, key codes, financial management accounts, detailed cash flow forecasts, performance versus forecasts. The list is quite extensive. It's about one page, one DD document I saw was 20 pages of A4 of just questions. So start preparing things like that now. Again, very often I come across companies with employee contracts all over the show. So get an HR consultant in, sort your HR out, sort your IT out, sort your legals out, sort your health and safety out. A lot of knowledge is in people's heads. Get it out of their heads. Have a procedure for every 6 months. People can put down things they've learned, things that they're doing differently to what they did 6 months ago. All this will come out during the DD process and will either confirm the valuation or reduce the valuation. The other key thing is, because it's a monumental key part of the buying process, buyers often use this as a litmus test to see how well the business performs. Because if I can keep you, Chris, very, very busy doing all these documents and finding information out for me, does the company suffer? During
Interesting.
the head of terms and we do the SPA, are the trends down? Have you lost revenue? Have you lost margin?
Very interesting. Can it
And
survive without you for 6 months while you're doing the due diligence?
exactly. And if you do find trends that are going in the wrong direction, that's going to impact valuation. So I may offer you £5 million to the company, but because we took a snapshot of the company pre-DD and post-DD, we found things that have dropped. We're going to revalue your company to say £4 million. So during that process, although it's sometimes fairly short, but it's very, very intense, we look for any downtrends. So preparing for it, not only to give the information to the buyer, but also to ensure that you make sure the company still continues and still grows, so that no one can come back to you and go, actually, things have taken a bit of a downturn, we're going to devalue the company.
And it's really interesting because we're supporting actually a client of ours of their business at the moment. And we are responsible for that particular organisation for their automatic enrolment pension compliance. So we do all of that work for them. And the lawyers have come back with a 2-page question document just specifically on the nuance of have they complied, where's their certificate, all of that. So you're right, that due diligence process is really deep. Is really deep. Now I get it, because the buyer actually doesn't want it's VC money, so it's venture capital money, but the buyer doesn't want to buy an organisation where potentially there's a liability that comes up that they didn't know. So that due diligence process, expect it to be long and fairly detailed. How long does that due diligence process take when you buy a company, or what experiences is it? 6 months, a year? In terms of factoring in a time frame.
Depends how big the company is and what kind of deal we're talking about.
Yeah.
If we're talking less than 10 million, provided most information's there, I would say 8 to probably 16, maybe 20 weeks.
Yeah.
Obviously, if it's a bigger company, that could take 6 to 12 months. It really depends on the size and how much detail people go into. Just bear in mind that when they do the DD, the buyer is paying for those costs. That they're paying for solicitors' fees, accountancy fees to forensically look at your company. So they want the job done as quickly as possible, but as thorough as possible.
Yeah.
And so by having things prepared and in a big vault, for instance, or data room, will actually be very attractive for a buyer, because they know that all they can do is just give access to the solicitors and accountants to go through all their paperwork, and it's there. And so that's quite appealing to a buyer. So being prepared will make the company a lot more attractive to a
That's a
buyer.
good sign as well, isn't it, to that
Yeah.
buyer? Like that element of, like, if they're unpicking stuff, I think as a buyer, I'd be a bit concerned in terms of that. Great stuff. Love this conversation, and I've learned a lot, which is why I love doing these interviews, and it certainly supported my knowledge base. I really appreciate that. Cliff, we'll make sure we put links when we share this to everything you're doing. But I'd love for you to share where people can find out a bit more about you.
Thank you, Chris. If you want to go to businessbydesign.co.uk, get more information on that. You can go to the YouTube Tips from the Tub. I'm also there. I've also written 2 books on Amazon, The Cash Flow Code and The Smarter Exit, so you can find me there as well. Or on LinkedIn. Just type my name in there, and I'll be the only one with that name. So you should easily find me.
Perfect. Thank you, mate. And it's one of the benefits of having an unusual surname, isn't it? People haven't got to worry. Although there is one Chris James in Belgium somewhere that often gets confused with me, but being the only one is pretty good. Thank you for everybody who joined us. I hope you really enjoyed this. If you're watching on YouTube, please comment. Please like and subscribe, because it really helps us deliver really good quality content on a fairly consistent and continuous basis, which is what we want to do. I'm on a mission with What Happens Next to really empower you, if you're watching this, to make those decisions as early as possible so that you can live the life you want in this chapter of your life. Hopefully today's been useful. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you on the channel soon.